Welcome in, everyone. Just a quick connection question to sort of get us into the mindset of today's discussion. Feel free to answer the question, or if you just want to ponder it silently, you can also put your thoughts in the chat. If this is something that resonates for you. Just to get us thinking about today's topic, my question is, have you ever had to advocate for yourself? And lost my waiting room participant. Have you ever had to advocate for yourself? Have you had to advocate for yourself recently? How did it go, and how did you feel in your body afterwards? So just something to get us sort of thinking and pondering around this topic of self-advocacy. Have you had to advocate for yourself recently? How did it go? And how did it feel in your body afterwards? I want to welcome you all to this Reyou Mindful Lunch event. So just a reminder for anyone who is unfamiliar with myself or the work that I do at Reyou. I am Patlee Creary, and I'm the lead facilitator at Reyou. Reyou supports individuals and teams with training, narrative, and community building practices so they can navigate life's most challenging moments. And we do this through capacity building workshops, group programs that use writing, storytelling, conflict transformation, and mindfulness-based stress reduction practices. And one of the wonderful things I love about being in Reyou, oh, yes, thank you, Yamilo, is that we get to offer free tools and learning, and community strengthening events like this Mindful Lunch. So thank you so much for joining me. I want to introduce to you Kristy Hourd. Kristy is a Canadian Certified Counselor in solo practice. Her practice is called Through the Cracks Therapy, and she specializes in working with neurodivergent folks who are looking to get out of cycles of burnout and that not quite recovery state in order to create a life that feels more sustainable. Kristy is joining me today to talk about the self-advocacy blueprint. So thanks for joining us, Kristy. I'm going to pin you.
I'm excited. This is going to be a good conversation.
I think so too. But I just want to, before we get into the questions and the conversation, I just want to highlight with Kristy being a Canadian Certified Counsellor and this being a Reyou Mindful Lunch event, I just want to establish for the benefit of our listeners, people who are going to be watching this recording, that what we're about to talk about should not in any way be taken as mental health diagnosis, treatment, or advice. This is all for general information purposes, and we're asking that everyone be really intentional about treating this mindful lunch session as a safe space for discussion and community building, not one for expecting diagnosis, treatment, or crisis intervention. If you have any questions about any of the points that are raised today, or feel that the points that we're discussing have an impact or reflect in any way on your own mental health and well-being concerns, I encourage you to have a one-on-one chat with a mental health clinician, someone like Kristy, or someone at the nearest hospital or medical center that's closest to you. I'm also available for a private chat and could help point you in the direction of the right resources. Clinical resources, but if you are in crisis or need immediate help, please do reach out to your nearest hospital or mental health provider. All right. So, Kristy, we've known each other for a while, and self-advocacy has come up in our personal discussions in various ways. So you have lived experience of mental and emotional well-being, health, professional, and entrepreneurial challenges that come up every day, but they're hard to quantify and explain. tell us a little more about yourself and how you've come to think about self-advocacy.
Yeah, so to know what my relationship with self-advocacy is now, it's helpful to look at what it was before that was really on my radar. It was a very different lifestyle. I ignored self-advocacy for a big part of my life. It was always not something I needed to do. Anything that I wanted or needed was selfish, and it was always for later. Right? There was that someday timeline on the things that I need. When I get this done, or when this person is okay about this thing that I'm helping them with, then maybe. And so anything that I needed was filling the small spaces that were left over after everyone else's needs took up their space. And so I was filling small cracks, and it was like self-care being just first aid recovery, right? Slap a band-aid on it and keep going, which really doesn't make things better for you in the long run, which is what I found out, because waiting for someday, I ended up in a job that I was good at but hated. I was burnt out, I was sick, I was tired. And my relationships even looked different when I wasn't really consciously engaging with self-advocacy. I always knew the other person better than they knew me. I wasn't bringing my needs and my genuine self into the relationship because I was more concerned with making sure they had all the space they needed first and just taking what was left over, which meant that only parts of me were coming into my relationships with loved ones. And that was something that really drove that need for change, because I got tired of hurting myself and letting other people hurt me. And I was tired of having that timeline for Sunday without any dates, right? I wanted someday to be now. So that's when I started working on that. And that was probably 6 or 7 years ago. And my life looks very different now. I'm doing work that I love. I'm bringing my whole self into my relationships, as uncomfortable as that is. And it's really changed my life for the better. It's ongoing work, right? I've become the person that I needed, but I should say I am becoming, because I'm never going to be done. But I started showing up for myself, and I started taking up my own space instead of just taking what was left over. I let myself exist, and that's really what my relationship with self-advocacy is making sure that I get to exist first in my own reality.
That's a really nice way to put that, making sure that you get to exist in your own reality. That's a very rich statement right there. And I like it. I love rich statements. Yeah, they agree with Stephanie. That's quite powerful. Very powerful way to put it. But okay, so let's take this back to just clarifying what we mean by self-advocacy, because I feel like there can be misunderstanding and misuse of the word in like or typical conversation. What is self-advocacy, Kristy?
Yeah, so to really narrow down what self-advocacy is, sometimes it's more helpful to look at what it's not, because a lot of us end up integrating it with a lot of other things and thinking it's the same thing, which means that our self-advocacy ends up being ineffective because we are calling it something different. And a couple of the things that I see being tied in with self-advocacy and prioritized over self-advocacy a lot of the time is activism and advocacy for others, right? And there's a big difference between those two things and our own self-advocacy. One of the ways that I like to think about it, and it was a clinical supervisor that introduced me to the metaphor, and I've just ran with it ever since, is the 3 hats analogy. So there are 3 different hats we can wear at any different moment when we're showing up for ourselves and other people. And we have our activism hat, which is the one that we often feel pressured to put on unless we're showing up on our own timeline for that, right? And it's the one that is very loud. It's not sugar-coated. It is a demand. It is a push for societal change, and it's done in community. We're never really doing activism alone. And so that's when we're showing up big and we're overriding our own fears, and we're showing up in groups and community to say this is enough. It's very loud. The advocacy hat is one that you can't wear at the same time as you're wearing your activism hat, because advocacy for other people is about meeting them where they are, right? It's a lot softer. Some people say it is the sugar-coated piece, and it's working with an individual to move them forward from the point that they're already at. And so it's less about making demands and more about collaborating, or even making demands of other people on behalf of someone else, right? It's on the individual level, and it often is done alone, right? We might be the only person showing up to stand up for another person. And it's usually dealing with another individual or a singular company or something that's not on the systemic macro level. And before you wear either of those hats, we have to wear the human hat, right? And that's where the metaphor sort of falls apart, because we're just human, right? You got your skull on before you wear the hats, but your human hat has to fit underneath any of the other hats that you're putting on. And if you're having to take off your human hat to show up in activist spaces or in advocacy, then you're not engaging in self-advocacy, and you're going to end up burnt out, and it's not going to be sustainable. We always have to wear our human hat first. And that's where self-advocacy is. And so if we're tying our activism and our advocacy for others into that same piece, that's where it's going to start getting a little bit messy. Thinking if I have a really quick definition of self-advocacy, and I think it really is being the person that you need to end up in a life that is sustainable and comfortable for you.
The person that you need in order to end up in a life that is stable and comfortable for you. Did you say stable or sustainable?
Both work, but I said sustainable, but stable is, on some levels, if it's stable, it's sustainable.
Yeah.
On others, it's stable and it's not going in a direction we want. That's a different conversation, but it all sort of fits together.
The person that you need. That's interesting. Like I think it isn't always easy to think about the person that we need being ourselves. But I think sometimes we try to allow for that to happen, especially when we use words like self-care and so on. So help us understand this a little bit more, Kristy. How does self-care fit into this idea, or this very thick, rich concept of self-advocacy being the person that we need?
So it's one of those relationships between the two concepts where self-advocacy means engaging in self-care, but self-care does not always mean that you're engaging in advocacy. There are times when our self-care is one of the ways that we're sort of perpetuating the fact that we aren't showing up for ourselves, and we are just slapping a Band-Aid on it, right? I just need to decompress, right? I'm not going to change the stressor, but I'm going to try and get the stress through my body so that I can keep taking more on, right? And self-advocacy is about taking on what you're capable of taking on. And so when you're a self-advocate, you're going to engage in self-care because we all need it. But if we're only engaging in self-care, then we're not self-advocating.
So how I like to think about this is that self-advocacy is action-oriented behavior. Like it's agentic. It's filled with your own agency, in the sense that you are defining what the end state looks like, and you are also seeking the resources and getting yourself to that particular point of the end state. Whereas self-care is part of that, but it's not necessarily as action-oriented in every respect. It can be quite passive. Sometimes that might mean stepping back. It might mean, like you said, decompressing, looking for other ways to offer care. But the advocacy part, I feel like, is really action-oriented. It's very driven in terms of going out there and trying to move the needle on something.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to put this into the chat, or to the audience as a chat question. Why would self-advocacy be important for professionals, caregivers, entrepreneurs, or community team leaders? Thank you, Yamelo. So the question's in the chat there, and just taking a few seconds to think about that, to ponder that. Why would self-advocacy be important for professionals? Maybe you're a caregiver, maybe you're an entrepreneur, or maybe you lead a team, or you're a community leader, formally or informally. Why do you think self-advocacy would be important in those particular ways? I want to turn the question over to you for these various identities that we might carry around. We're a professional, or a caregiver, we're a parent, entrepreneur, you know, I lead a team. Why would self-advocacy be important in those situations? And what kind of strategies could people look into if they wanted to better advocate for themselves?
So, I mean, I think self-advocacy is important for everybody, but the more public facing we are, the more we're interacting with other people, the more we're taking responsibility for others' emotional states or physical states or what's going on for them, the more important it becomes, because there are so many more things pressing in on our time and internal space. And so if we don't prioritize something, the world will prioritize other stuff for us, and we are never going to be first on that list. We have to be first on our own list and keep a balance between taking care of ourselves and showing up for our responsibilities, because that's what's going to make it sustainable, right? I want people to want to do the work for themselves, but if they are not quite there, it's important work to do for the people that you're working with as well. Because if you aren't feeling whole, people are only getting a piece of you, right? And if you want to be the most effective in your work, the most productive, the most sustainable, if you want to make the biggest impact that you can over time, that means making sure that you have enough space for yourself. Strategies, the meat and potatoes of the thing. Values-directed behavior is a really, it always feels like a very counselor type statement, but it's one that I bring up a lot, even outside of a counseling room or when I'm doing work, because values-directed behavior is a way for us to have a structure to determine what we need to prioritize and how we're going to be able to do that. It's also a way to get to know ourselves. I think it's really easy to define ourselves by what we're doing or what we are to other people. And it's really hard to decide who we are to ourselves and what we like about ourselves and what drives us. But when we have our core values in our conscious mind, it can help us make decisions. It can determine the behavior that's going to feel good for us, even if we don't have any good choices in front of us. And it's the way that we can work on switching direction if things aren't feeling good, right? When you've got that internal ick feeling and you're not entirely sure where it's coming from. When we can touch base on our core values, we can make sure that we're working in line with them, or it might even make it easier to determine if we are in violation of one of those values, and that's putting a finger on what isn't feeling good. And so values-directed behavior is one of those things that I bring up again and again and again and again, because it's really the foundation for a lot of the other ways that we tend to just show up in the world. So we'll kind of go through the list, right? The next one.
Sure, and I can post that. So there were six items.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to post that really quickly in the chat so others can follow along with the tools and strategy list. I think I'd share this in a social media post as well. So this is the tools and strategies list that Kristy is talking about. So we already talked about values-directed behavior. Tell us what you mean about keeping receipts.
Yes. So I think the idea that immediately comes to mind is that you're in an argument and you are showing the receipts, right? Here's what this is, but it's a little bit wider than that. Keeping receipts means keeping your own thoughts and needs and the things that you need around you to show up on hand. So it's more for you than it is for other people. You're not justifying yourself to someone else, but you are keeping things organized so that you have what you need within easy reach. And one of the, I think, I'm not going to say most important, because anytime you're having to show up for yourself is really important, but I think it's really prevalent that in the medical industry, navigating that from the patient side of things, keeping receipts becomes a really important part of advocating for ourselves in that space. And so it means having a med binder where you are keeping copies of all of your test results and letters from doctors, and you are taking notes and summaries on appointments that you've had and things doctors have said to you. They can't gaslight you if you wrote down what they said verbatim, right? It gives better questions to ask because we can often get so nervous and feel so minimized and dehumanized in appointments, whether that's the practitioner's intent or not, that we can't pull up that information, right? We might be sitting in fight or flight and our memory files are not going to be working. But if we know, because we have a list, we're going to keep that stuff available to us. So they're not going to be able to steamroll us or run us over or make sure that we don't get to bring up the things that we need to say. And so keeping receipts is for you, not just for other people. Asking questions, right? Asking for clarification, asking for what you need, being clear on what other people's boundaries are and how you're expected to show up in a space, and being able to answer those questions for yourself as well, knowing how you can show up in a space. And so asking questions is one of the hard things to do, I think, when we're in conflict or we're facing some kind of authority, or, somebody's really on a monologue like I am right now, and interjecting a question feels really intimidating or like you're being rude or things like that, right? Self-advocacy can mean showing up and finding a way to ask those questions, even if it means following up later or throwing a hand in or having hand codes with your friends for when you have something to say and something you want to ask and you don't want to interrupt and you just want them to know that that's there, right? It's not always just in places of authority. Sometimes it's in one-on-one with people we care about too, right? Asking questions can feel like we're doubting them or like we're not believing them or like we're asking them to justify it. And quite often that's not what it is, right? We're asking questions to clarify the concept in our own minds and in our own reality. And being able to show up for that and being able to even like saying the quiet part aloud and saying that is what I'm doing, right? I'm believing you, I'm interested, I'm asking questions because I want to understand, right? And we can show up for ourselves better when we're not afraid to make sure we know what's going on around us. Okay, these strategies are getting more stressful as we go down the line. The next one is letting yourself be seen, which is a really, really hard one. Showing up where we are visible in our vulnerability feels dangerous. And it's worth acknowledging that sometimes it really is dangerous, right? Systemic issues mean that we need to read the room first. And if we are not safe showing up in a space, we get to prioritize that. But that's not necessarily every aspect of our lives. And sometimes there are a lot of places where we are hiding and we don't want to be seen because it feels scary to be vulnerable in front of other people, even people we care about. And so letting yourself be seen is a big part of self-advocacy, because you can't get what you need if you're not ready for it to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
And so showing up, taking up space, letting people look at you, even if you're uncomfortable with it. Meeting your needs. It can be hard to do something that we need to do for us before we're doing what we need to for other people, especially because a lot of us have been societally conditioned that that's not okay. And you deal with yourself later, right? You are not the priority, you prioritize others. And keeping a balance between meeting our absolute responsibilities, right? The cat has to be fed. If we're a caregiver, that person needs to be taken care of. But it's never every moment of every day. And we sometimes sort of neglect to take up some of those extra spaces where we could be balancing our own needs. And we're working on wants of the people around us instead of our needs. And we really need to put our needs first. And that can start really small. It might be as much as like, I have to go to the bathroom, and instead of holding it for an hour, I'm going to go and I will finish whatever task I need to after, right? It can be really, really small because we are so used to ignoring our own needs that our system is going to respond when we even start meeting our own biological needs, right? When we're thirsty, get a drink. If you're hungry, eat on a schedule. That's a more complicated thing, where eating schedules are a whole other business and we all have one that works for us. But we're very often skipping those things, right? We're hungry, but we're not going to stop for lunch because this thing needs to get done first, right? Making sure that we're meeting our even most basic needs can be the place where a lot of us start. And from there, it builds into what we need in interactions with other people and what we need at work to do our best work and what we need to learn to be improving ourselves in the ways that we want to as we go. And now I'm going to flip it over and say it is about meeting your own needs and showing up for yourself, but also support is collaborative, right? Self-advocacy means asking for help and letting other people bring that in, being part of community. And that means trusting other people. And so when I talk about self-advocacy and I say trusting other people, that sounds like two different things, but it can very much be the same. We need to show up and trust the people around us to show up for us. And if we get disappointed occasionally, that's a thing that we work through, but quite often we are not trusting people that we really could because we're afraid to be seen. We are trying to meet our own needs or minimize our own needs before we're ready to lean on community.
Wow, I feel like those points are just so bang on, spot on. And as much as I try to be mindful, to be values directed, like I'm seeing myself appearing in some of these points. I'm seeing the value of some of these points. Like keeping receipts is something that I've learned from you, and I found out in the last year how important that was, especially in the realm of health advocacy. Being able to go back to my notes when I'm sitting with a doctor and say, well, the last time I was here, or this was the date when this particular thing happened, and I've been tracking this. And this whole idea of, and it really does kind of come down to letting yourself be seen, you know, as for everything that you stand for and everything that you believe in, and with all your vulnerabilities as well, which I think is a really important takeaway, because it really amplifies that in order for us to be able to do that, we do have to trust ourselves, right? And trust that we deserve, as you said, to take up space, and trust that we will do our best to fill that space when we are given that space, but also to trust other people to allow us to be seen, to help us meet our needs. Because self-advocacy, as much as we have that self element in it, it's not something that we can do alone, if that makes sense. Like it sounds counterintuitive, but it definitely isn't something that happens outside of community, as you mentioned. So I think this is super useful, and I just wanted to check in with the chat here. Chantella has made a point here that you're aware of the needs of yourself and your team. It's important to share what those are, and to see results, you must be able to advocate and continue to advocate for those results. And Yamila has written, quote, meeting your needs before you try to meet others' wants was something that she needed, like needing to hear that. Like I'm so excited to go back through the recording of this session, because I feel like there's lots of very important note points, and I'm really slow with the note taking today. So I'll be coming back to it to try to pull out those notes that are going to be so helpful for maintaining this conversation with people in my own circle. So we have a few minutes. Kristy, I wanna just frame this really as an exploration of thinking about one aspect of that, those 6 things that you talked about there, maybe kind of going back to values-directed behavior and boundaries. So in terms of thinking about identifying a value and how those values help us to set boundaries, and then understanding exactly what we mean by boundaries. So I'll put the question in the chat just as a broad question, but I'm gonna invite you to talk about it a little bit before we invite persons to weigh in on that chat question. What do we mean by boundaries, and how does values tie in with that? Or should I, sorry, English, how do values tie in with that?
Yeah, we can't set effective boundaries if we don't know what our core values are, if we don't know who we are and how we want to show up and what we need. If we're not clear on those things, any boundary we set is going to feel wishy-washy and not be quite where it needs to be. And increases the stress that we feel during conflict, because we end up trying to prioritize what others are saying their core values are when they're showing up and the thing that's most important to them in that moment. And we need to be able to use context to prioritize. And if we know these are my top 5 values, this one I like, and this one I like, and they're both coming up here, but only one can show up, we need to know based on context which one we need to prioritize. And if we're really clear on those core values, that becomes easier and easier to do. And so then we are setting effective boundaries, and we do know what those boundaries need to be. And so just sort of a quick, like, what boundaries are and how they show up is boundaries are meant to protect the self and create opportunities for others to connect with you, right? And so you'll notice I didn't say anything about limiting what others can do or the way that they show up or directing their behavior. It's all about you and protecting the self and showing up for yourself. So I think when I talk with people about boundaries and they say, yeah, I know what my boundaries are, it's this. And they say, well, this person needs to stop doing this, and they can't do this to me, and they have to stop. And I'm like, none of that is a boundary, right? There's no boundary there. That is trying to direct and control someone else's behavior, which we do not have control over, which means we're going to feel constantly like our boundaries are being crossed, and we still don't know how to fix it, right? I set the boundary and they're crossing it. What am I supposed to do now? Right? But really, a boundary is about you and what you're going to do, and you are the only person that can cross your own boundary, right? Other people can engage in behavior that we do not want to tolerate. We can't stop that behavior, but we can set a boundary around how we're going to react when that happens. And so the formula I use for a boundary is, if this thing happens, then I will. Right? And it's about setting those flags and internal milestones in your body, in your mind, and how you're showing up to say, this is where enough is enough. This is where I'm walking away or doing this thing that is going to respond to the boundary to remove me from what is not working for me. We can't make the other person go away or stop yelling or do that thing that's annoying the crap out of us, but we can decide how we're going to show up in those moments. And so that's why using values directed behavior is a really important piece of that, because we can make sure that that behavior that we choose is in line with our values so that it feels good to do instead of feeling really bad. I think so many of us worry about setting boundaries because we feel like we're cutting other people off, right? It's setting limits and it's disengaging connection. But it's really about showing them how to love you and how to show up for you and giving them that opportunity to do that, right? I'd prefer if you showed up this way. If you don't, then I'm going to, right? And it creates an opportunity for them to alter their behavior to continue engaging with you. But ultimately, whether that boundary is crossed or not depends on whether or not you're following through with what you told yourself you were going to do.
Oh, that's so powerful. I love that line. Like, the biggest learning, if this happens, then I will. I just wanna I just want to share in the chat a list of values. And this list actually comes from this is from James Clear. I'm sorry. Comes from James Clear's Atomic Habits learning. I'm just gonna put the link to that in the chat as well. But I'm just kind of wondering, as we kind of process a little bit about what Kristy just mentioned, if this happens, then I will, and matching that to some of our own values. If this particular thing that crosses the line, then I will. And then looking through that list and sort of seeing what might be one of your top values and how that would drive your self-advocacy and how you demonstrate that within your boundary. Like, that's something to really sort of think about in terms of how we would show up and encounter with other people who we feel are crossing our boundaries, right? So I'll leave some room for persons to think about that a little bit. What is one of your top values that drives your self-advocacy and helps you set your boundaries. So we'll sort of modify the question a little bit. I'm ad-libbing here. That drives your self-advocacy and helps you set your boundaries and demonstrate those values and who you are on a daily basis. And while you're thinking about that, I just want to share really quickly an anecdote about something that I saw in a social media post recently, where a person had they posted like a screenshot of a text that they received, and their post was about the fact that so this person is an entrepreneur. They had closed their store for the Christmas holidays. They received this text like over the Christmas holidays, so maybe it was Christmas Eve or something, and it was from a customer that needed something. But not only had they closed the store for the holidays, but they're on maternity leave, was what they said. And they could not, for the life of them, understand why this person wasn't respecting all those boundaries, and so, coming back to what you just said, Kristy, if this happens, then I will. It's not like you can't direct other people's behavior, but you have to establish your own boundary and let whatever values are driving you determine where that boundary line is and how you will respond when someone else attempts to cross that boundary. And in this case, there could be hundreds of other responses to this particular situation, but maybe one of those options might be, I'm not even going to look at my text messages, or I'm not even going to check my personal emails while I'm on mat leave, and so on. Or because the store is closed, out of office. Sorry, the store is closed. We'll respond to you in the new year. So the more, and I've heard this before with a number of other persons, and I've experienced it myself, the more I am true to myself and my own values, suddenly it's almost like the other things just tend to fall away, and more people understand that, hey, this is the road that you're walking. These are the things that you're valuing. And so you tend to find yourself more with people who align with that, because they either learn, or the people who can't learn or understand, then they tend to sort of fall away, right? Those relationships kind of move a little bit further down on that hierarchy. There was a saying in my former life, if you can't change the people, change the people. When it comes to anything really, boundary setting and anything else. All right. I'm super mindful of the time. Kristy, what's the one big idea? And it sounds like we've got lots of big ideas, but what's the one big idea you would like our audience to walk away with today and to keep talking about in their circles?
So it's a little bit of a thought exercise. So in your mind's eye, or reflect on it, however you want to do that. Imagine the hero that would come to save you, what they're like, what they do for you, how things change when they've saved you, and get really specific. We know exactly who we need to show up for us. Now, what do you need to learn to be that person?
Say it again, Kristy.
What do you need to learn or work on to become the hero that you need?
Yeah. That's powerful. That's powerful. Kristy, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a valuable and filling lunchtime conversation. The mindful lunch recording, as well as just a little takeaway toolkit with Kristy's points there about the 6 things to bear in mind with self-advocacy. And I want to encourage folks to think about the way that storytelling and narrative and mindfulness and MBSR work can actually facilitate and shore up that sense of self-advocacy, that taking that time to really find yourself with meeting yourself, making yourself being seen, meeting your own needs, and even seeking collaborative support. Finding yourself in like-minded circles is more often than not one way to do that, as you learn with and learn from other people. Thank you so much for joining us, folks. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, hump day. All good.